It's time to remove the mystery from medicine, to seize control of one's health, and to genuinely comprehend the essence of terms like wellness and wholeness. The Ask Dr. Jill podcast provides information, knowledge, and empowerment information to empower you to be wholly well. Dr. Jill Waggoner has nearly 3 decades of medical practice and has a deep-rooted belief in diverse approaches to patient care, well beyond conventional medicine. This realization has fueled her lifelong pursuit of understanding a holistic perspective on health.
Hello, welcome back. I hope you guys have been enjoying the Ask Dr. Jill podcast this season. And so I want to remind you, share it with other people if there's something that you think that other people in your life would enjoy. Please share it with them, like, love, share, subscribe too on my YouTube channel. Please subscribe. And that way we can, you'll get whenever new stuff comes out, you'll just kind of know what's going on. Follow me on Facebook and Instagram and every other whatever there is. I'm always at Ask Dr. Jill. So Ask Dr. Jill on everything. And the website is askdrjill.net. So how y'all like that? So I hope y'all are having a good day. The last podcast we did, we talked to Sharice Brown, and she and I talked about a lot of stuff, but we also kind of got into menopause a little bit. And I know for y'all, menopause is a really big thing. I think hormonal changes, period. So I'll do some talks as we go forth. We'll kind of have some different podcasts where we talk about just the hormonal changes that happen in women throughout life, from puberty all the way to menopause. So what I want to talk to you today about, though, is kind of give you some of the symptoms of menopause and some of the things that estrogen does in your body, so you will know whether you are menopausal or not, or at least know whether or not to get, your hormone levels checked. So the first thing, I have women all the time come up to me and say, oh, does menopause skip a generation? Or no, menopause does not skip a generation. Every woman, if she lives long enough, is going to be menopausal. Those symptoms may look different for some women. And so the question is, do you have symptoms? Well, many women don't know whether they have symptoms or not, because the only symptoms we talk about is hot flashes. So everybody thinks, oh, well, I had no hot flashes, so therefore I must not have gone through menopause. Yes, you did. Menopause, the term simply means cessation of menses. So if your period stopped, you went through menopause. And so, yeah, you did. Your symptoms may be different. But let's talk about kind of premenopause and menopause, because for some women, they start to notice symptoms for years before their period stops. So there are some women that are as young as 30, 35, and they will notice that things are changing. So one of the first things that women notice with menopausal and premenopausal changes is menstrual irregularities. Now, your menstrual period will not be the same all the time. I think it's good for us to talk about that a little bit. Everybody thinks that their period is supposed to come on the same day of the month. It is not. So menstrual cycle can be anywhere from 21 to 35 days. Day 1 is the first day of flow. So literally in women that cycle every 21 days, they can have flow every 2 weeks. I know. That is just, you think, oh my God, something horrible is going on, but not necessarily if you're one of those people who cycles every 21 days. But for some women, as they enter that premenopausal, perimenopausal, menopausal phase of their lives, one of the first things that they notice is that the cycle will change. So they'll notice irregularity. It may be changes in how frequently your cycle comes, how many days you have, the flow of it. Is it heavy? Is it light? Do you have more spotting? So all of those are indications that for many women that something is going on hormonally. So you may be premenopausal perimenopausal or even menopausal. Now, to be officially menopausal, you have to be without a period for 1 year. So a lot of women, as they go into menopause, they will miss, 3 or 4 months, and then they'll have another cycle and they'll go 3 or 4 months again. And they think, what is going on? You're just menopausal. But you are not officially in menopause until you have missed a period for 1 year. So I have women, sometimes they will go 9 months and they're like, it is gone, and it comes back. So, God has a sense of humor. The other thing, the next symptom that women are really accustomed to, and this is the one that people talk about a lot, and that's the vasomotor symptoms. Vasomotor symptoms are hot flashes. So you can have hot flashes or night sweats, and they're common during perimenopause and premenopause and menopause. And that's a result of the fluctuations in your hormones, particularly in estrogen. So when estrogen starts to drop, women will have more vasomotor symptoms. Now, there's another hormone that drops, and that's progesterone, and that usually happens first. So the first thing that many women will discuss or come in and say, Doc, I'm not sleeping. That's because your progesterone is gone. So when the progesterone gets low, then you can't sleep. And so women will literally start waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning. They're like, I wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and I can't go back to sleep until 5:30, and I got to get up at 6. And so this is a problem. And if you couple that with the hot flash, it is not a happy time. So think about that when that starts to happen, even though your period may still be regular and coming like it always was. That could be an indicator of pre-menopause. Then the next symptom that I think is worth us talking about, because many women don't talk about it, and that's changes in your genital urinary tract. So what that means is, for a lot of women, they start to get vaginal dryness. Nobody talks about that as a symptom of menopause. And so they get vaginal dryness and they don't know what's going on, or they notice that intercourse starts to be painful. Because if your vaginal mucosa is dry, then the friction from intercourse is going to be painful. So that could be one of the symptoms for menopause or premenopause. Another thing is urinary frequency, that you have to go to the bathroom more often. That is because your urethra, which is that opening that urine comes from, is inside of your vagina, or right inside. And so when that area gets dry, then that mucosa gets thinner and it's irritated. And so it makes you feel like you've got to go to the bathroom all the time. So a lot of women will have urinary frequency. The other thing that will happen in the genital urinary tract is some women will notice that their normal body odor changes. So I often have a real hard time with women with this one. They say, Dr. Waggoner, something is different. It doesn't smell right. And I am saying to them, it is because of your hormones. They don't believe me. They think it is something else. We test and we give antibiotics, and it's like, listen to me. Can we try a little bit of estrogen just to see if that will help? So I think it's important to know that that's not something a lot of women are going to talk about, or they will say that their partner has noticed that their odor is different and they don't know what's going on. And that sometimes can cause problems in a relationship. But if you know what's going on, so you couple it with the pain and a different odor, and for some women, just the desire has decreased, it really can cause problems. But if you know that that's part of menopause, then you can talk about it and go and specifically talk to your doctor about that and be open to trying things. For some women, just doing a little vaginal estrogen in a pill form or a gel form or a cream form can really help that a lot. Or using some things like KY jelly or some other lubricants during your sexual activity can really help. And I say to women, if you're having a real issue with vaginal dryness, and it's really getting uncomfortable for you, incorporate some of that lubrication with your foreplay. So that can be, part of what you are applying during that time. And also extend foreplay, because for some women, the more foreplay they have, the more secretions they'll get. But this is stuff that you need to know so that you and your partner can talk about it and you can kind of coach each other through it. Then the next symptom is declining estrogen can cause a bone health or bone density to decrease. So that's one of the reasons. And what does that mean? That means that your bones, some people would say, get thinner, but they are not as sturdy as they were before. They kind of get, hollow is not a good word, but they get more porous. The bones get more porous, and that increases your risk of fracture. So when you are premenopausal, for some women, definitely menopausal for most, then the bone changes. And so that's why you really have to be careful with falls and that kind of thing. But if you continue to do weight-bearing exercise, like walking, running for some people, but exercise that where your weight is at issue, that will stimulate your body to continue to build bone, so that won't be an issue for you. I think so those are some of the symptoms that you need to know, but I think that it would be beneficial for us to talk about what estrogen does in your body overall, because if you understand what estrogen does, when we get to the part where we're talking about should you replace your estrogen or not, that's not in this segment, that's in our next segment. But if you know what it does, then you can really have a conversation with your healthcare provider about whether or not estrogen is a good thing for you, or hormone replacement therapy is a good thing for you, and you just won't be going by what your girlfriend says. And she's always going to say, girl, that causes cancer. Okay. Well, again, we'll talk about that a little bit later. So one of the things that estrogen does, which I think is very important, is that it plays a significant role in cardiovascular health. So women who are premenopausal have a lower risk of cardiovascular disease because estrogen is cardioprotective in some ways. Now, there's some controversy as to whether or not replacing estrogen gives that same cardioprotective effect, but it is important to know that as you head into menopause, that risk increases because the benefit or the protective role from estrogen declines as your estrogen declines. So one of the things that estrogen does is it promotes vasodilatation. What that means is your blood vessels dilate. When your blood vessels dilate, flow is better. And the other thing is that your blood pressure improves. So a dilated blood vessel has less pressure, and therefore your blood pressure decreases. So sometimes women will say, I don't know what's going on. My blood pressure is just going up. Well, of course, you want to look at things like, what are you eating? Are you exercising? What is your stress level? All of those things. But you also may consider, maybe I am premenopausal and my estrogen has decreased, and so I don't have as much dilatation of those blood vessels. The other thing is that estrogen enhances the production of nitric oxide. So those of you who are preventive medicine people and you read all of the stuff, you know that nitric oxide also dilates those blood vessels, and that really decreases your risk of a lot of things, including dementia. So think about those things when you are considering whether or not you need to get a little more estrogen in your body. The other thing is that estrogen has anti-inflammatory properties. So it helps to reduce inflammation in your blood vessels. It also prevents the development of atherosclerosis atherosclerosis, which is plaque in those blood vessels, and also just in the rest of your body. So some women will notice that when they become menopausal and that estrogen is gone, now they have more aches and pains. So they're like, why are my hips hurting? Or why are my knees hurting? They weren't hurting before, but because of that increased inflammation in your body overall, and those blood vessels in particular, you start to have some of those issues. Another thing that estrogen does in terms of cardiovascular health, it has a favorable effect on your on lipid metabolism, and therefore helps you to have more high density or healthy cholesterol. Not exactly the terms that we want to use anymore, but most people are familiar with healthy cholesterol, and helps you to lower your levels of low density cholesterol or bad cholesterol. And the bottom line is that decreases your cardiovascular risk overall. So that's another one of the reasons why when you become menopausal or perimenopausal and that estrogen decreases, then your cardiovascular risk decreases. The other thing, estrogen has antioxidant activity. So those of you who have followed me for a while, I've talked about antioxidation. So oxidation occurs and it causes damage to your cells. So it's believed that oxidation in the DNA can cause precancerous cells and lead to some cancers. When you have estrogen on board, your body is able to repair that oxidative damage, which decreases your risk of a lot of things, particularly some cancers. So important as well. The other thing is that estrogen promotes endothelial function. Okay, here we go again. So inside of your blood vessels, there are these cells that line the blood vessels, and those are very important. The function of those blood cells are really important, and that helps to regulate the tone, like I was saying, dilating the blood vessels. That helps to regulate whether you have inflammation. And if you have inflammation in a blood vessel, you are much more likely to have a clot in a blood vessel. So what does that mean? That means you are much more likely to have things like stroke, right? So you want to be aware of those and talk about that with your healthcare provider when you're making those decisions. The other thing, estrogen has a very important role in cognitive function. So, I talk about cognitive function all the time. I did a series recently online where we were during the Daniel fast. Some of you followed me on that. And I talked a lot about cognitive health, cognition. Cognition is the functioning of your brain. Does your brain do what your brain needs to do? Is it doing brain stuff well? Well, when you have adequate estrogen, then your brain just works better. I was saying to Sharice last podcast that we did that when I became menopausal, I couldn't spell because cognitively I was kind of not on top of my game just because the estrogen had fallen. So one of the things that estrogen does, it has a neuroprotective effect in the brain. And that means it promotes the survival of brain cells. When you have more estrogen, your brain cells are well. And if your brain cells are well, you are able to function better and think better. If they are not, Houston, we have a problem. So it's been shown to protect against oxidative stress. We talked about that. It has been shown to protect against inflammation, not only in the blood vessels, but also in the brain cells. The other thing that estrogen does in the brain, that it helps with neuroplasticity. You've heard this term before, but the brain's ability to adapt and reorganize in response response to an experience. So what our brains do, particularly when we sleep, our brains repair themselves. They throw away information. It throws away information we don't need. It puts information that we do need in memory. So your brain is always going through this kind of reorganization, and you're using more of the neurons that you need. When you have estrogen on board, that ability to adapt, your brain to adapt to situation improves. And then just overall cognitive function. Estrogen has been shown to modulate neurotransmitters. So neurotransmitters are the chemicals in your brain, things like, what the neurotransmitters, serotonin and melatonin and some of those things. When your brain is functioning well, when you have adequate estrogen, then you're able to produce those neurotransmitters in a more effectively, and that regulates your mood. So that's one of the reasons why when women become menopausal, people will say, well, they're mean, or they are less pleasant for some of them, or they have mood swings. I know some of this stuff is kind of like, people think, oh, it's not real. It is real. When your estrogen level is lower, then a lot of women are more irritable, and they are more irritable because those neurotransmitters change. And when those neurotransmitters change, your emotions change. So estrogen influences the production and the activity of serotonin and dopamine and norepinephrine and all of those that are really important for us to be able to feel good and function good, and our emotions to be good. That's really, really good. One of the kind of last things I want to talk to you about is the metabolic effect of estrogen. So your estrogen influences your metabolic health, and that includes things like insulin sensitivity and glucose metabolism and body composition. So, those of you who have gone through menopause or who are premenopausal, before menopause, most women, if they gain weight, unless you're a specific body type, but most women will put on more fat around their hips. But when they are premenopausal, postmenopausal, now they get all of this body, this tummy fat. And that's because as the insulin drops, then your insulin resistance, as your estrogen drops, then your insulin resistance increases. And that means you have more circulating insulin. And when you have more circulating insulin, you deposit more body fat. You deposit body fat in your gut. You deposit body fat around your organs. You deposit body fat in your liver. So that's why a lot of women, although we should eat good all the time and we should really focus on our overall health and well-being, but when you become premenopausal and menopausal, you really, really have to start focusing on those things, and you can look at your body because it starts to change. So that's the precursor. We'll talk about this next time. We'll talk about what other things we can do, and whether or not you should do estrogen replacement therapy, and what estrogen replacement therapy is, and what does the research really say in terms of your increased risk of things like cancer, and your overall health and well-being. So stay tuned. We'll talk about it. Tell your girlfriends. We're going to talk about this thing for real. So y'all have an amazing day, and I'll see you next time.